立法會主席。
The President.
各位早晨，本會現在繼續2014年僱傭修訂條例草案二讀辯論。有冇議員要發言？呢位議員。
主席，我本人民建聯係非常之高興，今日係見到男士侍產假嘅相關法例喺本會恢復二讀，亦都期望一陣間係可以順利產生係男士侍產假。民建聯過去無論係婦女事務委員會、家庭事務委員會都係同社會各界一齊努力去推動落實男。
The DAB and Family Commission has been in support of the paternity leave and believe that this is a step in the right direction. Yesterday, I listened to what members had to say, and I've been pondering certain issues. Now, what social benefits will we be able to achieve with paternity leave? I don't think paternity leave would encourage fertility or childbirths. There is a very little desire to give birth to babies. Will the paternity leave lead to more babies being born? I don't think whether to have children would have little to do with whether there are any benefits from the government, because there are so many other factors that have to be taken into account. So if you say that with paternity leave introduced, it would encourage childbirth, then I think this is too simplistic a view. But I'm sure that this is a step in the right direction, though. Whether the paternity leave will help women tired of all the difficulties in the course of pregnancy. Now, Ms. Sit Ho said there are not many women counsellors here who have given birth. We don't have that many women counsellors here. And those who are women here may not have given birth, but I'm someone who has been through it. I think that I can say from experience, paternity leave is better than no paternity leave, and 3 days is really better than nothing, and it is too simplistic to say that with paternity leave there will be the answer to all the problems. Now, in the course of giving birth and taking care of the babies, the newborns, it boils down to the support of the male counterpart, the male spouses, and so on. Some said that it would be difficult to tell the employer the exact delivery date. Now, if one chooses natural delivery, it would be very difficult to predict precisely the date of confinement. Now, I'm sure that it varies from person to person as to whether there should be male spouses keeping them company in labor. And I think that this is a long process, the 10-month pregnancy, the looking after of the newborn, and to women, not only is it a joy, it can be an anxious process. It can be a really depressing process. At the beginning of pregnancy, many women are concerned about the stability of the pregnancy, and they do need the husbands to keep them company. So paternity leave would certainly be of help to the pregnant women in terms of support. We all understand that there may be different challenges between for the first pregnancy and the second pregnancy. I heard from some members yesterday the criticism that the government is being unfair, and the government is offering 5-day paternity leave to civil servants, but only 3 days to non-civil servants. I don't think I can support this argument. The government is setting an example and offering more in the way of paternity leave. 3 days represent a beginning. Whether we're talking about 5 days or 3 days is nowhere near enough to support the women giving birth, the whole process of childbirth. And I hope that the employers would be prepared to offer a longer period of paternity leave so that they can support the entire process of childbirth. The other issue that we debated quite a bit yesterday is the fact that paternity leave is the beginning, and who is going to foot the bill. I think there can be a number of modes of payment. The first one is to stick with the employment ordinance. We should have contribution. This is really a manifestation of this model. 4/5 will be picked up by the employer. The rest will be picked up by the male workers. What about the government? There is another suggestion by members quoting other jurisdictions that the whole cost should be borne by the administration. I heard from Mr. James Tien yesterday that in order to minimize arguments, the government should pick up the tabs, and the business sector would be prepared to support it, and the whole process of legislation will be speeded up. I think this is the crux of the matter. Given the narrow tax base and given the tax rate in Hong Kong, I would support the idea of adopting the conventional model, i.e. the employer and the employee should make contribution or joint contribution to the costs. Now, women enjoy the maternity leave, the 10 weeks altogether. I think the paternity leave is a new beginning, and I hope that in the days to come, when a review is undertaken, the government can encourage more employers to offer full pay, fully paid paternity leave. Now, if you compare this with the 10 weeks of maternity leave, which is pretty long, the number of days that we are talking about, 3 days versus 5 days, would mean just a couple of days of leave for male workers. I think as a next step, we should encourage the government to offer, or encourage the employers to offer paternity leave on full pay. Now, whether the government should bear the costs, as I said, given the narrow tax base and the tax rate, Hong Kong is a pretty attractive place for the business sector to make investment in Hong Kong. So I don't think it is the right time to expect the government to pick up the tabs. Let me turn now to how we should exercise our choice and how we should vote. Now, there are amendments to be made for the paternity leave to be 7 days instead of 3. The more certainly would be better. Now, the crux of the matter is not how many days we are talking about. It is important that women can be supported throughout the process of childbirth, and there can be many factors at play instead of just the number of days in terms of paternity leave. But as a beginning, I find the 3 days acceptable myself. What is more important is whether regardless of the consensus forged by the Labour Advisory Board, we are going to vote on a model which is a deviation from the LAB consensus, that the LAB is not an elected body, but with the creation of the LAB, there have been a lot of labour issues that were discussed, and consensus was reached at the LAB. Now, through the LAB discussion and deliberation, we can have examples like the statutory minimum wage, the paternity leave, and with a consensus at the LAB, the labour organizations and the employers' representatives can throw their support behind it. If, notwithstanding the consensus of the LAB, we are going to vote for the number of days that we desire, then we are emasculating the LAB entirely. Because if the LAB's deliberations are overthrown by the Legislative Council, then the LAB doesn't have to have any meaningful discussion, because at the end of the day, their consensus will not be respected. And they are playing the role of a cushioning effect for us. And their role will be diminished significantly. I think we have to respect the consensus of the LAB. It is a long process to improve the labour rights, and it's not a matter of how many days there are in the paternity leave. This is only one of them. There are so many other issues that need accommodation between the labour and the business sector. Whenever we talk about labour issues, like on many occasions we talked about whether there should be offsetting arrangement, or whether we should import labour given the labour shortage. Both sectors are digging their heels in, and if we do not cherish the Labour Advisory Board mechanism, then I would imagine it would be pretty difficult going forward when we have to deal with all these controversial issues. I would urge the Secretary or the administration to act proactively to facilitate discussion. I'm sure that both the business sector and the labour sector will have their own respective position when it comes to importation of labour. It would be a no-no for the labour sector when it comes to bringing in labour from outside, but given the labour shortage affecting so many different sectors in Hong Kong, it would be hard for us to wait until a consensus has been built, because it would be a hard thing to happen, the consensus. So I hope that the administration would act proactively and take the lead in the interest of the common good in Hong Kong, and facilitate both sides to engage in discussion and make concessions in order to find a glimmer of hope going forward.
Mr. Andrew Lau. Mr. President, originally I intended to speak yesterday, but Dr. Lo Wai-Kwok eventually spoke on behalf of the BPA. 10 odd members have spoken. I think I'm duty-bound to speak as well. Paternity leave, PL, is not a new subject to us. When I was chairman of the Productivity Council, we're the first public body to offer PL. So it's not true that employers would definitely oppose PL. For example, my company offers vacation leave, which is for, say, wedding, funerals, etc. After offering PL, an employer with conscience will become an ordinary employer. If we want to have more conscience, you have to increase the amount of leave. For public bodies, it's difficult. Once there's a piece of legislation, you have to observe it. You don't need to do anything special. So we agree that PL has been discussed for a long time. Yesterday, many colleagues quoted examples from all over the world. However, you have to compare like with like. Yes, Northern Europe is of course good. The tax rate is 50%, so of course they'll give back the benefits to you. No big deal. But then in Hong Kong, we have a simple tax regime as well as low tax rates. So we cannot casually add something onto it. Yesterday, our colleagues spoke a lot, but the freest country, the most democratic country, the U.S., offers nothing. All right, you pursue democracy, but there you can't get what you want. So we have to give regard to the actual circumstances of Hong Kong. We all mentioned the LAB. The consensus mentioned by Mr. Riley is important. I was an LAB member 10 odd years ago. Mr. Matthew Cheung was also there. Mr. Wai-king and Mr. Poon Siu Ping were also there together with me. In the LAB, of course, we have different views. Some represent the views of the business sector. Some, of course, represent the views of the labor sector. But we don't always oppose one another. We always had discussions on additional leave, on long service payment, etc. All these were attained when I was an LAB member. We worked hard to reach consensus. I recall that once in Tokyo, at night when we were eating oden at a cooked food stall, Mr. Wai-king and Mr. Poon Siu Ping were also there. We talked. So it doesn't matter. We can talk and reach consensus. And this consensus has been respected by the administration. The LAB represents labor relations as well as the different needs of society. So we'll consider consensus. So we all respect the decision of the LAB. The government also respects the decision of the LAB. It's not like what some members said that the LAB is supreme over all of us. That's not true. The LAB has a tripartite mechanism whereby employers, employees, and the government respect one another. If we throw away this mechanism and ask everybody to follow the LegCo's decision, the business sector won't feel comfortable. So if there's anything to discuss, we can always take it back for discussion. For this insolvency fund, we also held discussions. Anyway, there's a time frame. There's one point that I disagree. Well, it's said that whatever the government gives us, the business sector will definitely accept. The BPA does not agree. In particular, for SMEs, if the government is suddenly very generous, Mr. Matthew Cheung is very generous, they say, oh, it doesn't matter. For 1 year, the government will foot the bill. I have to guarantee this employee who enjoys PL that he'll keep his job after a year. So that won't work for SMEs. So this is a major issue, but very often, after discussions in the LAB and in this council, decisions are always respected by one another. The beginning is always difficult. We should each make concessions. We should look at the economy. The government should also observe what merits there are with PL. I do not agree that PL can encourage childbirths. If you want more childbirths, you just ask your employees to work 3 days a week. There's nothing for the men to do. Well, maybe university professors have more time. They can raise more children. So we have to solve problems step by step. The government proposes a review in a year's time. I would like the government to tell us the pros and cons of the new system. It's not that the government wants to propose increasing 3 days to 5 days or 7 days in a year's time. Otherwise, it will be unfair to the community. We have to adopt a gradual approach. So don't immediately increase 3 days to 5 days or 7 days after a year. If the government is to do so, the business sector won't feel well, and it won't be any more willing to assist the government to reach consensus between the employers and the employees. So please respect this tripartite mechanism and get this amendment bill passed so as to give paternity leave to men. Thank you.
Mr. Winston Fang. President, this bill brings back to me the trick played on us by the SLW when we discussed the minimum wage. At that time, we agreed to set the minimum wage rate at $28 an hour on some conditions. One of them is that the meal break will not be counted. But then, very soon after the bill was passed, the government signed another agreement with its contractors, and all the shortfall under the minimum wage system would be paid by the government, and that included the meal break hour. I asked why. The secretary said that this was the practice of the government. The business sector would not be bound to follow. But I said, if the government did this, and the business sector didn't follow suit, will be criticized as being mean. And once the president is set by the government, sooner or later, the meal break hour would be covered. And no sooner than that, we now have this Employment Amendment Bill 2014. It proves what I said is true, because the civil servants were given 5 days of paternity leave in 2012. And now we have this bill tabled at this council. Yesterday, many members criticized the business sector, especially Dr. Kenneth Chan of the Civic Party said that the government would like to make use of the Liberal Party and force this bill on every one of us and introduce 3 days of PL. Dr. Chan, you overestimate our power. We all know how close the relationship is between the Liberal Party and the government. The government would not give us a credit like that. Actually, the Liberal Party has a reservation about many provisions in the bill. Sometimes we seem to witness split of personality among some members. And they don't seem to speak with one mind. Many of them lament the disappearance of small and medium enterprises and small shops. They blame the landlord, the property owners. But don't you know that you are part of the problem? Because according to those failed businesses, well, rent is a problem, but there's the minimum wage, which adds to the cost. And there's so many regulations to comply with, nutrition labeling, and then very soon the regulation is imposed on VOC or residual pesticides. You have to check everything. You have to lab test everything. All those cost money, and even a penalty of 1,500 is considered for some minor encroachment of the pavement. They don't have 3,000 staff members for deployment. If you manage a small business, would you rather close it down, or would you just bear it and carry on? Mr. Lee Chang-an said that a paternity of 3 days at 4/5 of normal pay is just a meager sum. What's wrong? We have talked about it for so long, and this is the small benefit that we managed to get. But business owners will tell you that what they earn is actually their pay. And when their staff are on leave, they will have to stand in. For example, on the day of winter solstice, staff would have to leave early, otherwise they would be unhappy. They may resign, and they will be criticized that the boss is so mean. If we don't have so many other problems, then giving 3 days of PL would be okay. But all these added together, they can no longer bear it. I'm not exaggerating anything here. Members here know that if we operate an SME in accordance with Mr. Lee's requirements, there's no way the business can survive. Mr. Tommy Chow has suggested to Mr. Lee more than once that he would raise the capital for Mr. Lee to run a cafe. And if the cafe can survive for the duration of 1 lease, then Mr. Lee's suggested benefits will be accepted. But at least Mr. Lee has yet to accept the offer. Many members have criticized the employers, the businesses, as being careless and merciless. I hope some of our members, would go out and take a job and to see whether the business sector out there is so mean. Instead of trying to find your utopia inside this secluded chamber, or to ask for unreasonable benefits from your ideal position. Yes, there are unscrupulous employers. We should prevent exploitation through our laws. For example, closing down a business without paying wages, asking staff to work overtime without pay, failure to provide safe equipment for employees. I believe our labor legislation is already very well established. Many employees have abused labor protection legislation. My ward office has received many such complaints. For example, after injury from work, the employee would take sick leave indiscriminately, or when interviewed for a job, the female employee failed to disclose that she was pregnant. So what's the protection there for employers? No, nothing. I'm not trying to stir up a conflict. And I didn't want to speak in the first instance. But having heard other members, I believe their remarks may lead to a deterioration of labor relationship. Hong Kong is a community that treasure and value good labor relationship. In some old and well-established enterprises, labor relationship has been very good. For example, the employer would give them leave for funerals and even for the marriage and other festive occasions, although the law doesn't require them to do so. And some companies would give their male employee paternity leave, and some of these employees would also accumulate their leave so that they can make use of the leave to take care of their newborn babies and wives. If the employers are compassionate towards their employees, the morale will be boosted. But now trade unions want to fight for the interests of their members. The government wants everything to be translated into legislation. So in the future, people will be given 3 days of paternity leave as a matter of law. The employees will not regard this as something on compassionate ground. So the workplace will be a faceless and cold environment. It's already explained that for bigger companies, giving 3 days of PL is not a problem because they can redeploy people. But for SMEs and micro businesses, it may be a bigger problem. It's not that they cannot afford the payment, but they don't have sufficient hands to deploy or redeploy. And in Hong Kong nowadays, we have a labor shortage. It's difficult to get another one to stand in, and so PL would exacerbate the problems faced by SMEs. We all know which companies can better cope with environmental fluctuations and legislative changes. Of course, we are talking about big corporations. SMEs, of course, are also flexible, but our economy is now at par with advanced economies. Flexibility is actually a constraint for SMEs. Let's look at the Occupy movement this time. Many members said that there are a lot of people inside the shops, and the jewelry shops have registered increase in turnover. And in the Hong Kong Product Expo at Victoria Park, you see so many people there. That may be true, but we are talking about chain stores, big brands, big corporations. The chain stores are distributed all over the territory, although their branches in Mong Kok and Causeway Bay might be blockaded. Other shops in other districts may be able to make up the difference. But for the staff working in the occupied districts, what happened to their pay? They may just get the basic pay, no commission. From MOT to Causeway Bay, we have a lot of them, or most of the shops that are SMEs or micro businesses. What happened to their business volume? Well, whenever there is a protest or a rally, they can sell nothing but bottled water. I hope members would go there and interview them about what happened to them during the occupation period. Many members ridicule this word, harmony. I visited many countries for business, for pleasure. And then if you can judge whether the economy is good or not. Because if the economy is good, people there are happy. Is there good government? And you can judge it by seeing how harmonious the place is. Similarly, if you look at business, you can judge whether the business is going well if the employees are happy or if the people are in a harmonious relationship. And you don't resort to the sending lawyers' letters for issues big and small. But I think that in this council, we do not have harmony. So we have achieved nothing. We all want to mandate everything through legislation. That's not a solution. I have to admit that I'm old. Because only an old person would try to remember what those good old days. I treasure those good old days when we just joined hands and tried to get things done, no matter how or who would be doing it. So I submit, President.
Mr. Jeffrey Lam. President, I rise to speak in support of the bill. This morning, shortly after I got up, I had a text from my assistant to say that he cannot turn up for work because his wife is taken ill and he has to take his wife to the hospital. And I told him that's fine. Just take care. A couple of days ago, I talked with some friends of the business sector, in particular those who were affected by the Occupy movement, and they were having a hard time. The employees didn't have much in the way of commission. Even if there was, it was really like peanut. There wasn't enough for them to buy a meal. They are struggling with even the school fees of their kids, not to mention the rent and buying new clothes. The employers are concerned about them. The commission wasn't there. The employers were prepared to pay them nonetheless. The employers are empathetic towards their plight, and they were affected. Their livelihood was affected by the occupiers. I think these are employers with a conscience. These are employers who are concerned about the well-being of the workers, and they are concerned about society. They are not unscrupulous as they are made out to be. And people are sloganeering against the employers. In fact, the business sector has been concerned not just about the business. They are concerned about the employees, society. They do have their conscience. They respect the law. The General Chamber of Commerce has been around for a century or more. They have so many members, and President, beg your pardon. The Kwan-yuen has crept in. There are so many people who are saying that the business people are heartless. They are showing no concerns. I beg to differ. As I said, the General Chamber of Commerce has been around for well over a century. There are so many companies that are offering job opportunities to the people of Hong Kong, and they are doing their business in accordance with the law, and they're looking after the workers in accordance with the law. Now, paternity leave comes with costs. We've conducted a survey on the businesses, in particular the SMEs. They are concerned that if the costs are ever rising, they will be struggling. So we may be talking about a couple of days of paternity leave. We feel that the large corporations would have no trouble, but the SMEs might be. We didn't support legislating for paternity leave, but we do respect the LAB's consensus. We did consult the members of the GCC, and they would be getting themselves prepared for the decision. Now, I talked about respect. The business sector is respectful of other people. It is respectful of the government's decision. They are respectful of the workers. Under the Employment Amendment Bill, there will be 3 days of paternity leave, and the pay will be pitched at 80% of the original pay. And this is a big step forward as far as Hong Kong is concerned. I hope that the labour sector will understand that the business sector has to shell out extra costs for that. That they have to bear the costs, but as you are aware, it is getting more and more difficult for them to do business in Hong Kong. And I think the employer and the employee have to be mutually accommodating. They toil very hard, really, to make the profit that they have. I don't think it's good enough. It's a good thing for people to heap accusation at the employers in this regard, because this is tearing the social fabric apart. As Mr. Vincent Fang said, Mr. Lee Chuk-yen keeps referring to legislation in other jurisdictions, and why do we not follow suit? He talked about Sweden. He didn't talk about other jurisdictions. And he doesn't really want to start a cafe in a particular way, and I think he merely shooting his mouth off. There are other members who are suggesting that the paternity leave should be made longer, and the paternity leave should be on full pay. We object to this idea. Mr. Lee Chuk-yen suggested that there should be protection against dismissal for those who are taking paternity leave. I find this unacceptable. I don't think we should do anything which is detrimental to the harmony between the employer and the employee. If they sow discord and instigate the workers to be militant, then it will be counterproductive as far as the relationship between the employer and the employee is concerned. Just come to think of it, if a company doesn't have any idea whether the costs will be ever rising, then it will be difficult for it to secure more projects to generate more profitability and share out the profits with the employees. That some labor representatives are really blowing everything out of all proportion, and they're stirring things up in order to gain exposure, in order to gain political mileage. We think that there is a need to notify the employers of their intention to take paternity leave. Now, like this morning, my staff rang me up without 3 days of notification. He rang me up there and then and told me he couldn't turn up because he has to be with his wife. Now, this is all reasonable, and we would support that. I don't think the relationship between the employer and the employee can be fixed by just a couple of words. It is important to build, to forge the relationship. The relationship is 24/7. It's not a relationship that exists on paid day. Now, some said that if the pay hike is not good enough, then the employers are bad guys. If the paid holidays are not long enough, then they're bad guys. Now, we have to be concerned about the well-being of the whole of Hong Kong. Shouldn't we be concerned about the boss of an SME? There are many SME bosses who are telling me that why can the government tolerate all these people who are advocating lawlessness, which is detrimental to their business, and they're causing harm to the business people, and who's going to look after them? Now, these people are yelling charge, and so on, and they are causing all this trouble, and some of the companies will go belly up, and who's going to look after the workers? Will these people be looking after the workers? Let me come back to the bill. I said already, I stated already my position. If the business sector feels that something ought to be done, it will be done. We'll respect the LAB's consensus. I hope that the member companies will take up the issue.
主席
Dr. Kwokaki, Mr. President, I support the second reading of the bill as well as the amendments moved by Mr. Kenneth Chan. Originally, I did not intend to speak, but after listening to the speeches of the members from the business sector, I really have to speak on those remarks which distort the truth. In 2012, the government announced that there would be 5 days of paternity leave in the civil service. So, only civil servants enjoyed paternity leave, PL, back then. So this exercise is actually a continuation of that exercise. We're trying to right the wrong. Earlier, the CS administration published a report on our population policy. I was disappointed by that report. It's mentioned that we had a low birth rate and we could not encourage more childbirths. The conclusion then was regrettable because the conclusion mentions labor importation, opening up of our labor market, etc. In the report, very little is mentioned about why Hong Kong people or the younger generation doesn't want to raise children. Basically, the younger generation cannot handle their daily living. Property prices are soaring. Even in remote areas, a housing unit costs $10,000 per square foot. If a couple is fortunate enough to save some money, they can't even afford the down payment. Well, for those fortunate ones, get support from their parents. Some go back to live with their parents, and then they may have passed 30 years old, and those women might have passed the age for bearing babies. So today we're not discussing property prices or housing units or housing supply. Let me come back to this bill. If you talk to young couples and ask why don't they raise children, they'll tell you that one of the major hindrances is that they're worried about their daily living. So it's just the reverse of what the business sector says. They're worried about their jobs, their future. They're worried that because of pregnancy, they may not get promoted, they may be dismissed, so they dare not raise children. Some people claim that these people want to claim welfare, claim maternity leave for 4 weeks before and 6 weeks after childbirth, etc., etc. That's not the case. It's because young couples dare not raise children. All right, let me wear another hat, the hat of a doctor. For a pregnant woman, after childbirth, she is actually alone, helpless, because in a small family, it's very difficult for her to get sufficient support. The best support that she wants is her husband. She wants her husband to be beside her. If we don't have formal protection under the law, male employees won't casually tell their employers that their wives had given birth to a child he would like to take leave. The employer will tell him, oh, rent is so high, so many employees are working. Well, this is reality. We'll look at the long term. What happens in future? Shall we have young workers for the business sector? In our panel, we conducted some research. Before legislation, only large companies have been able to offer PL. You can say that big companies enjoy a competitive edge. Many big companies are actually owned by the property tycoons who are very wealthy. And other companies may not be able to offer PL to attract employees to stay on. I understand that the SMEs are striving hard, but if we can embark on a path that allows SMEs to offer PL as well, then workers will suffer. And the eventual victim will be the business sector. Well, some people don't want to increase 3 days to 5 days or 7 days. Some jurisdictions offer that. Some European countries offer PL in 2 portions. One borne by the government, one borne by the employer. That will help SMEs solve the problem. But the government has done nothing. The government has done nothing to help the SMEs. I understand that. So don't point your finger at the LegCo or our colleagues in LegCo. I also noted that, as Mr. Vincent Fang and Mr. Jeffrey Lam mentioned, companies like their companies, big companies, offer certain benefits to the employees for wedding or funeral occasions. Oh, of course, if every employer acts like you, then it's good. But in reality, that's not the case. in some cases, when an employee speaks, the employer will get unhappy or will treat the employee impolitely. Some people say that we shouldn't legislate. Here we are legislators. If we don't legislate, what should we do? We're here to legislate. We legislate to offer social protection to the labor sector in this case, to give them the only protection. And now we're creating another social division. Why 5 days for civil servants? Why not 5 days for the others? It's because civil servants enjoy privileges. Civil servants are taken care of by their big boss. Civil servants enjoy a competitive edge. Why should we do something to create further division in society? Why don't we treat everybody equally? Where's the rationale? One amendment is about the 4/5 payment. We understand that this is not even offered to pregnant women. We should bring this up. Even pregnant women should enjoy full pay leave. Of course, half of this council comprises functional constituency members. We shouldn't dream of passing this bill or this amendment. If in the long run you would like to encourage the younger generation of Hong Kong to encounter less hindrance and more incentives to raise children in order to enhance the workforce in the long run, then the government shouldn't just sit here and be passive and only acts whenever it is scolded. I noted that many colleagues have quoted the LAB consensus. I also read from the papers that the LAB representatives as well as the FTU members here voted for this in the LAB. Well, many said that 3 days was not what they wanted. At the minimum, they would like to have a similar protection as in the civil service. Dr. Helen Wong is proposing 7 days. You're hiding your conscience. Why is it that you're hiding behind the LAB consensus? The employers' representatives of the LAB always grab what's in their interest. Say if a certain government proposal is in their interest, they support the government. And very often they attacked the labor sector. And just now, you scolded Mr. Lee Chok-yan fiercely. I really cannot agree with you. Most SMEs are facing a problem, the biggest problem. This absolutely shouldn't be allowed in Hong Kong. That is high shop rent, not just in this term of the SARG. Ever since Donald Tsang's era, or even in Tung Chee-hwa's era, if you ask a citizen whether there's business-government collusion, whether there's property hegemony, they would answer in the affirmative. We have an assorted political scene. How were our CEs returned? They're returned by 1,000 odd people only, many of whom are from the big consortia. Even the SMEs have been suffering if they are from the business sector. You should see where the problems lie. You see, every year, we have at most 47,000. It looks good. Many civil servants, for example, are not covered by this bill. So in fact, the impact of this bill is very minimal. Unlike what you said, we should work together to solve this very problem so as to make Hong Kong society a fairer society. We shouldn't have a government returned by a small circle. We shouldn't just protect the big consortia, the big businessmen, and the property tycoons. Whom does the government fear most? Those people who protect and support the system. Those FC members here are helping them. Well, I shouldn't treat you as SME representatives. It's a lie, actually. So, prima facie, we're discussing 3 days, 5 days, or 7 days. But in fact, it's manifesting the biggest conflict in Hong Kong. This is why so many people came out in the umbrella movement. Hong Kong is a very distorted city. We have a very huge wealth gap. We have very sufficient protection for the businessmen. But the protection for the grassroots is very, very meager. And then we even heard very harsh words from the other side. We're being attacked very fiercely. We're now being attacked very fiercely, even when we're just proposing 3 days. So if we propose 5 days or 7 days, we'll be scolded even more fiercely. You talk about harmony, but that's not the way you should go about it. You should have equality and fairness in Hong Kong in your policies, such that our policies won't be inclined towards the property tycoons, the big consortia, the businessmen. And here in this council, the phenomenon is that the minority is monopolizing the majority. Don't think that many people love to go out and sleep in the streets for 79 days or 70-odd days and be arrested. You sit there and enjoy all the privileges, and then you scold those outside. Here, you can make decisions on unfair laws, unfair amendments. At the same time, you scold the people outside. You are reversing the reasoning. You are distorting truth. If we continue like this, we won't have harmony. And this government won't have any peaceful day, because the system itself is a decayed system. And we're not sharing the fruits with a hard-working labor sector. Ironically, the Chinese Communist Party always claims that it's there for the labor sector. But like many of our members here, they're not speaking the truth.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now invite the Secretary for Labour and Welfare to reply. Then this debate will come to an end after the Secretary has spoken. President, first of all, I'd like to thank the Chairman and members of the Bills Committee on the Employment Amendment Bill 2014 for their careful scrutiny of the provisions in the bill. Some 7 meetings were convened. I also like to thank the Secretariat staff because they have enabled the scrutiny to complete smoothly. I also thank the deputations for expressing their views to the Bills Committee. And I also like to thank all the 24 members who spoke yesterday and today. The purpose of the bill is to provide for eligible male employees 3 days of paternity leave. On this subject of paternity leave, the Labour Department carried out a very detailed study, and there was a very meticulous consultation with the Labour Advisory Board. The Labour Advisory Board is a tripartite consultative body comprising employers, employees, and government representatives. Actually, it has a history of 80 years. It has been a very effective communication channel on labor matters involving the 3 parties. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan spoke yesterday to querying the representativeness of the Labour Advisory Board. Let me try to explain. There are 6 members of employees. 5 are elected by trade unions. The mechanism is transparent and is well tested over time. The government values free choice. Trade unions are allowed to choose their own representatives, and according to the current election method, all trade unions register under the trade unions ordinance, irrespective of their affiliation, political affiliation. They can nominate candidates, and the representatives of LAB employee representatives are returned through secret ballot. So there's no way that the trade union will be excluded from the process. After a long and detailed discussion, employees and representative and employers' representative in the LAB come to a consensus and support the legislative proposal of the government and to provide 3 days of PL to fathers. And for that, eligible male employees can get 4/5 of their daily average wages. We set the PL at 3 days because this is the consensus of the employers and employees representatives reached after a candid consultation. There were repeated arguments and reasoning. Both sides listened to the others' aspirations and views, and it's a reasonable balance between the welfare and benefit for employees and affordability on the part of employers. This is a hard-earned achievement. It's not the fact that the 3 of the employers' representatives support 3 days of PL and the other 3 did not. Actually, all the 6 of them supported 3 days of PL for male employees. The Labour Department conducted a survey among Human Resource Management Club members. 18 members of them that indicated that on average the PL given to the employees was 3 days. 80% would provide not more than 3 days of PL. So we make reference to the current practice of providing PL to male employees voluntarily, and therefore the LAB members have come to a consensus that the government should legislate for the provision of 3 days of PL to male employees under the employment ordinance. Some members query why civil servants are given 5 days and now the legislation provides for 3 days. Let me now explain. Civil servants are entitled to 5 days of PL, and it should not be compared directly with the employment ordinance provision of PL. Well, the government provides 5 days to its employees, to civil servants, because as an employer, the government has come to this decision depending on its affordability and the arrangements that it can make for its manpower deployment. But if this becomes the law, that this becomes a benefit under the employment ordinance, it applies to all employers. And we must have regard to the situation in Hong Kong that most of the businesses in Hong Kong are SMEs, and no one can break the law if this is a benefit provided under the ordinance. On the question of pay, because the basis of providing PL is very similar to that for maternity leave, we believe the regulation and the detailed requirements should align with those under other statutory holidays. According to the employment ordinance, the pay for maternity leave is 4/5 of wages. Therefore, we set the wage level for PL at 4/5 of average daily wages. The LAB supports this. I note that some members think that PL should should afford full pay. I have to point out that PR is taken based on personal needs. It's similar to sick leave and maternity leave. It's not like the leave entitlement of employees generate, which would be based on full pay arrangement, such as statutory holidays and pay annual leave. We believe that the pay level for PL should align with the former category, and we believe that the level should be set at 4/5 of normal wages, and this is also the consensus of the LAB. I have to stress again that the law will only provide a minimum statutory threshold. The government always encourage employers to take into account the factors such as business conditions and affordability, so that better benefits can be provided to the employees. The Labour Department will continue to expand efforts to promote family-friendly policies, and that would cover also paternity leave. Statutory PL is an employee benefit which has been under discussion for a long time. We believe that the proposal is practical, pragmatic, reasonable, and acceptable. As Mr. Wai-king has said, the current proposal is a good starting point. I understand the proposal in the bill may not meet the expectations of all members and members of the public. I urge members to allow this to go forward so as to benefit eligible male employees. In a year's time after its introduction, there will be a review to explore room for improvement. And on this, the LAB is agreeable. Members may recall that when we first introduced the protection of wages on insolvency ordinance, it only covered one aspect and capped at $8,000. And through progressive improvements, we now cover $36,000 of wages in arrear, and also a month's payment in lieu of a notice, a severance payment, annual leave pay, and statutory holiday pay. So we should adopt the same practical approach. Actually, in the minimum wage ordinance, we did the same. The minimum wage rate was set at $28 in the first instance, and now the two policies have developed progressively, benefiting grassroots people. The two ordinances provide a good reference that it's always to get a start. As the saying goes, a 1,000-mile voyage begins with the first step. I believe members and the government share a common goal, and that is to introduce PL as soon as possible on a statutory basis, so that prospective fathers can be entitled to this family-friendly employment benefits. In view of the members' comments on the provision of 2 days of advance notice for PL, and after serious consideration and after consultation with the LAB again, we are going to remove this rigid requirement of advance notice so as to make it flexible for fathers-to-be. On the other hand, we make it a requirement that the employer should be notified before taking PL. Phone call on the same day would suffice. I would move a CSA to allow this possibility. Mr. Kenneth Leung, on behalf of the Bills Committee, has moved amendments on the number of days of PL and the pay. As I've said, these have not taken into account the affordability of employers. And Mr. Lee Choi-han's amendment seeks to extend the employment dismissal protection for maternity leave employees to PL employees in an unreasonable manner. I cannot accept this after careful consideration. I'm going to explain in more detail why in due course. As I've said, statutory benefits for Hong Kong employees are paid for by the individual employers. In other jurisdictions, there may be contribution, there may be government co-payment, And that's why in those jurisdictions, they are able to offer longer paid leave, because sometimes the employee would have to pay a part for it. So when we consider how to improve employees' benefits, we have to, of course, consider the case for the employee, but also we have to consider the affordability of the employer. We have to pay attention to the concerns and worries of different stakeholders. In Hong Kong, for decades, the LAB has been playing this important consultative role on coordinating such benefits. The employers and employees representative in the LAB have been able to have mutual trust, and they have been engaging in the sincere dialogues for decades so as to carefully explore ways to improve employees' benefits by consensus. And when they considered proposals for improvement, they will not lose sight of the cumulative burden on the employee, and they will not propose anything that will not be affordable. And this has been a well-established mechanism in Hong Kong, and is also conducive to the maintenance of a good labor relationship. If we overturn the consensus in LAB, it will not just undermine the mechanism which takes care of both the interests of employers and employees, and it will also show our neglect to the question of mutual respect when it comes to interests of stakeholders. If we increase the number of days under PL to 7 days without a consensus at LAB, or to prohibit the dismissal of employees on PL, it would seriously undermine the cooperation between the labor sector and business sector through consultation. There will be a long-term negative implications for labor relationship in Hong Kong. Therefore, I urge members to be accommodative and be pragmatic and respect the LAB's consensus. Please pass the CSA from the government, but do not support the CSAs proposed by the Bills Committee and Mr. Lee Chok-yan. Would like to see the law implemented as soon as possible. The government has promised that there will be a review after the bill is implemented for a year. Mr. Tan Ka-pil asked when the new PL provision will be implemented yesterday. If the bill received its third reading, the government would, through a Gazette notice, announce the commencement date. And the commencement notice is a piece of subsidiary legislation subject to negative vetting of this Council. So we are going to issue the commencement notice as soon as possible. We hope that in early March, the new PL provisions will be implemented to benefit male employees who are about to be fathers. I have to point out that if members' CSAs are passed, then I will have no choice. And reluctantly, the government will have to withdraw the bill so that the new term of LAB can consider the issue afresh. And I hope that a consensus can be reached very soon. Of course, we are going to offer every assistance in that process. With this remark, I move the resumption of the second reading of the bill. I urge members to support government's CSAs and oppose to all member CSAs, so that all prospective fathers can be benefited from this family-friendly employment policy. Thank you.
Please do not yell in your seat. I now put a question to you, and that is that the Employment Amendment Bill 2014 be read the second time. With those in favor, please raise their hands. Those against? The Assembly now claims division. The bill will go for 5 minutes.
開始表決。
Voting begins. Members, please check your votes. If there's no question, voting is closed. And the results displayed. 49 present, 47 for, 1 against, no abstention. The question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Employment Amendment Bill 2014. Committee stage.